Alright guys, and welcome back to the channel, and today I will be giving you my full card predictions and full card breakdown for UFC 323, Dvalishvili versus Yan 2, and Pantoja versus Van, and I absolutely cannot wait to get into it, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the very first fight of the night, which is Muhammad Naimov versus Marion Santos, and a very interesting fight here at featherweight. And we look over at the Muhammad Naimov side, and he's looked pretty solid since he's been in UFC. He's picked up quite a few wins, very good win back a few months ago against Bogdan Grad, who we just saw fight this past weekend. Before that, Khan Ofli. He did have the loss to Felipe Lima by submission, but we're not going to knock him too bad for that. Felipe Lima's a very good up-and-coming fighter with great jiu-jitsu, and he's looked very solid with his boxing and his striking. And then we look over at Marion Santos, and he has looked fantastic. He is on a 4-fight win streak, picking up big wins, over in the LFA against Rafael Barboza, his UFC debut against Khan Ofli, Francis Marshall by split decision, and then his most recent and impressive win, which was Sadykhov, and that is a huge win for a up-and-coming young fighter. And on paper, it's a very, very interesting fight, striking-wise. This is purely pretty much going to be on the feet, and even though Muhammad Naimov has looked very solid, in his boxing and his striking, Marion Santos, to me, has just looked a little more fluid, a little more well-rounded with his striking, his Muay Thai, and I am kind of leaning towards the Marion Santos side in this fight because the kid is he's looked very slick, very sharp. He's finding his shots, properly timing his strikes, and I think he can just out-edge Muhammad Naimov in this fight. And I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be back and forth. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Marion Santos moves on to a 5-fight win streak, and he beats Muhammad Naimov by decision in this fight. I think it's going to be competitive. Muhammad Naimov might wind up taking a round from him. Marion takes it 29-28. But I think Marion is just slick enough on the feet, just talented enough on the feet to just edge these strikes in these rounds, and he is going to have a small reach advantage, which I think will just help, that striking, the fluidity, the shot landing. So I am going to go ahead and stick with Marion Santos by decision in this one. Alright, and we are moving on up to Ibo Aslan versus Iwo Baraniewski, sorry, I thought that was a J for a second, and a big fun fight here at light heavyweight, and, looking over at the Ibo Aslan side, Ibo has been very, very questionable so far. I mean, this guy has the look of a killer. He looks like he should be top level, a very menacing, very powerful, very deadly striker. But Ibo is actually very sloppy. I mean, the guy just gets in wild exchanges with his chin up, and he just brawls. We saw him in the Ion Cutelaba fight. I mean, him and Cutelaba were just getting in these exchanges, and Ibo was just swinging wild, big looping shots, big wild punches with his chin out. He was hitting Cutelaba, Cutelaba was hitting him and cracking him. And some of those shots, you're like, oh boy, like Ibo could wind up going down at any second. And then his fight against, Anton Trocoli. I couldn't remember his first name for a second. I mean, he's going back and forth in that fight, and, Anton Trocoli is not good. He's a very sloppy striker, chin out, not a solid fighter at all. And Ibo in that fight is just going back and forth in these wild exchanges with Trocoli. And, he's cracking Trocoli, but Trocoli's fucking cracking him back. And, and it's just this wild, very sloppy, not technical exchange. And any other fighter that would have a little more power in their hands would have wound up putting Aslan to sleep in those exchanges. But he was able to survive the storm against Trocoli, eat those kind of like mid-level power shots, and then he was able to crack him with a shot, hurt him, and knock him out. But, there were just these sloppy exchanges where he was taking a lot of risk, he was getting hit a lot, and luckily that power wasn't enough to put him down. Otherwise, he would have been put down, So, Ibo's just very sloppy. He doesn't have a lot of good, solid technique, and he just seems to make a lot of mistakes on the feet, even though he's pulled off a few UFC wins. But then you look over and he's taken the losses to, Ion Cutelaba, who took him down and submitted him. And then the most recent loss to Billy Elikana, which doesn't look good. And then you look over on the Iwo Baraniewski side, and even though he is pretty much debuting, this is going to be his first actual UFC fight out of the Contender Series, this guy has massive power in his hands. He's got the kind of power where he touches you, he drops you, and you're done. And we saw what he did in that Contender Series fight, just catching Muhammad Ali with that overhand right on the chin, dropping him and TKOing him. And then in his other fights, he's been able to get the fights to the ground. He's been able to get on top of guys, mount them, TKO him. So he has a lot of power in his shots. And he doesn't seem to be a very sloppy fighter on the feet. He seems to pick his shots well, and he's got that power to land. And even though a lot of these guys that he's fought on the regionals, and over in his home country in Poland, seem to be kind of tomato cans, and he's not really proven. That's the problem in this fight, is that he's not proven. He could come in, he could get in an exchange with Ebo. Ebo could eat a few shots, and then Ebo could wind up coming back and TKOing him. I would not be surprised. But so far, his technique and his power seem to be kind of on point, and that's what scares me, is that if Ebo was a little more technically sound, if he had better defense, if he tucked his chin, if he moved his head, I would be picking Ebo in this fight. But I have a feeling Ebo is going to come out, try to just get in this sloppy, wild exchange with this dude, and his power is going to land first, and he's going to put Ebo down. Ebo's been fighting guys that don't have a ton of one-shot power, but this guy, even off of his one Contender Series fight, we can tell he's got power, and I think he's going to wind up clipping Ebo in this fight early in a wild exchange with Ebo's chin out, and I think he's going to hurt him, and I think he's going to put him away. So even though he's unproven, he's fought some tomato cans, I am just going to go ahead and give him the chance because he's got the power, he's got the shot placement, and Ebo's just wild and sloppy and loops his punches and nothing's down the middle, and his chin's out and he doesn't move his head well. So I'm going to go ahead and give Baraniewski a shot here to get this big TKO win in his official UFC debut. All right, and now we are moving on up to a very exciting fight, and I'm very much looking forward to this fight in Edson Barboza versus the returning Jalen Turner, and I am so excited about this fight because I am a huge Jalen Turner fan. I was a massive Jalen Turner fan before he, took this temporary retirement, and, from day one, I have just seen so much potential in this kid. He has so much potential, so much skill. I mean, he's absolutely massive for the division. He's got excellent striking. He's got pretty good defense, and Jalen Turner has just had all the tools to become a top-level fighter and, ascend up the ranks and make it to a potential title shot one day. But he has just been plagued with very close split decision losses and poor fight IQ. Jalen Turner has all the tools in the world. If he really puts his mind to it and he cleans up his mental fight IQ mistakes to be a future title contender, a future champion one day. The kid is that talented. His frame, his size, his striking, his technique. But he's just had these mental lapses. And we saw what happened in the Renato Moicano fight where he dropped Moicano, had the fight won, but he made the huge mental mistake of walking away before the ref stepped in and stopped it, and you never do that because until that ref pulls you off, you need to keep striking until that ref touches you, because you never know. Your opponent can recover, your opponent can get up, and then your opponent can wind up coming back and getting you, and that is what Moicano was able to do. And it was a big shot. He dropped him. It looked like Moicano was pretty much done, but he was still there, and Turner should have just kept following up. He should have kept throwing shots, and he should have let the ref pull him off, but he didn't. He made a huge mistake, and he took that loss, unfortunately. And then after that, he had the pretty upsetting loss to Ignacio Bahamondes, who's a very talented up-and-coming fighter himself. Ignacio's a huge problem in the division. And again, Jalen Turner was looking good, in the early half of that fight, and then he wound up getting taken down and he wound up getting submitted, So, again, just mental lapses that are costing him these fights, and he was really hard on himself about these losses. He's taken the time off now, and I think he's going to be able to reset himself mentally. He's taken the time, he's thought about, what can I do to improve in these fights? What can I do to be sharper, to be more technical, to make sure I don't make these defensive mistakes, and I think this time off is going to benefit him very well. And then we look over at Edson Barboza, and Edson Barboza, is just an absolute veteran. I love Edson Barboza. He's been around a long time, one of the best kickers in the UFC, period. Some of the most deadly Muay Thai kicks, some of the greatest kick knockouts we've ever seen. Back in 2012 when he spinning wheel kicked Terry Edom and knocked him over like a frozen action figure. I mean, Edson Barboza has just been one of the scariest, most deadliest strikers we've ever seen. But, you know, Edson Barboza in recent years, you know, he's getting up there in age. He's 39 years old. He's almost 40 years old, and he's starting to decline. He's starting to slow down. His muscle reaction, his fast twitch reactions are starting to slow down a bit. And now he's starting to get behind in fights. You know, and we saw what Lerone Murphy was able to do to him over a year ago and just kind of shut him down, stifle his kicks, stifle that Muay Thai. And then in his most recent loss, which is not good, losing to the very mid-level Jakar Close. And if you're losing to Jakar Close, it is pretty much official that you're slowing down. Father Time is catching up to you, and you just don't have that power and reaction anymore. You know, and if this fight was happening like 5-6 years ago or so, I would be giving Edson Barboza much more of a chance. But I think Jalen Turner, this time off, is going to do wonders for him. I think he's going to come in refreshed, rejuvenized. He's going to come in with a bigger killer mindset than ever. And I think Jalen Turner, this is going to be the second coming of Jalen Turner. This is where he's going to turn it around. He's going to correct these mistakes, and he is going to ascend the ranks, and he's going to be a massive problem at lightweight. I'm telling you, Jalen Turner has the potential to be a future title contender if he can clean up these mental mistakes. And I think he's just going to be massive in this fight. You know, he's 6'3" compared to Edson Barboza's 5'11". They have the same reach, but Jalen Turner is going to use those hands and that reach better than Barboza is. I don't see Barboza landing any big kicks on him. I don't think Barboza is going to catch him with anything. And I think Jalen Turner is going to march forward, put the pressure on Edson Barboza, and I think he's going to catch him with a combination of shots and knock him out. And I think we're going to see Jalen Turner, the return, to be a massive green checkmark success, and I think he will move on to, you know, a bigger, better opponent down the road. But I'm going to go ahead and say that Jalen Turner makes good on his return from his temporary retirement, and we see the resurgence of such a talented, young, phenomenal fighter. So I am going Jalen Turner by first round KO in this one. All right, and now we are moving on up to Marvin Vettori versus Bruno Ferreira in a very, very fun fight here at middleweight, you know, and we look over at the Marvin Vettori side, and, you know, you've heard me talk about Marvin Vettori in the past. You know, Marvin Vettori is, you know, he's a pretty solid fighter. You know, he's a veteran at this point. He's been around a very, very long time. You know, he's had a lot of wins, a lot of losses recently. You know, and Marvin Vettori, like I've always said, you know, he's okay at everything, but he's not great at any one particular thing. Like, you know, he's got okay striking, but it's not great. He doesn't really have KO power at all. You know, he's not touching guys with one shot and dropping them. He's not even really hurting guys in fights, you know. He's got okay grappling occasionally, but, you know, Marvin Vettori is mostly just there. You know, he's got an iron chin. He's got pretty much one of the best chins of all time, one of the best chins in the company. He's almost impossible to hurt. You can just hit him with the kitchen sink. You can hit him with a baseball bat, and you're not going to hurt the guy. So, you know, Marvin Vettori, more than anything, is just tough. You know, he's just a tough, plodding boxer. You know, and his hands aren't super sharp. They aren't super great. You know, he just kind of hangs in there, hits you with 1-2s, hits you with a 1, kind of moves, hit you with a 1. But this is why Marvin Vettori struggles in these fights, because he's fighting guys that are just faster, more athletic, that hit harder than him, and that have much better striking than him. You know, and this is why he's on a 3-fight losing streak, losing to Jared Cannonier, losing to Roman Dolidze, losing to Brennan Allen, you know, and he just kind of gets stuck on the feet, you know, and that striking is not good enough to get him ahead in these fights. And then we look over at Bruno the Hulk Ferreira, and Bruno is an absolute tank of a fighter. I mean, this kid is coming to the UFC, and he has been putting guys away with one shot. You know, he's very explosive, very, very heavy, you know, in the hands, very heavy in his forward movement, and, you know, his explosion off the feet with these punches, you know, and he's looked very good in his last fight, picking up the submission win over Jackson McVeigh. Before that, the win over Armand Petrosian, getting him in an armbar, you know, and he's got very good jiu-jitsu. And then he did have the loss to Abus Magomedov, but he was looking pretty decent in that fight before he wound up losing, you know. But his power is just, you know, it's next level. His athleticism, his explosion. And the one thing that he's going to have in this fight over Marvin Vettori is just power, speed. And that is what kills Marvin Vettori, you know, because he just gets behind in the striking. He gets stuck on the feet, and he starts taking damage. He starts eating shots. And I think in this fight, Bruno Ferreira is just going to be faster. He's going to be more powerful, and he's going to beat Marvin Vettori to the punch for 3 straight rounds. I don't think he's going to knock Marvin Vettori out because, again, Marvin Vettori has pretty much one of the best chins of all time in the company. And I don't see Marvin Vettori being able to get around the power or the athleticism. And I don't think he's going to take Marvin Vettori down and submit him. I don't think Marvin Vettori has ever been submitted. I'm pretty sure he has not. But I think Bruno Ferreira is just going to be in his face, hitting him with big shots, hurting him, busting him up. And I think Bruno Ferreira is going to take a 30-27 unanimous decision in this fight. And I think it's going to be pretty easy for him. You know, Marvin Vettori is only 32 years old. He still has a lot of time left in this game, but I think Marvin Vettori has just hit his ceiling. You know, with his style, he's not ever going to fucking develop, you know, knockout power. He's not going to ever develop sharp, deadly hands. You know, you can tell he's just pretty much at his level. And I think, you know, Bruno Ferreira is just going to beat him in every area on the feet, beat him up. There's a possibility he becomes the first guy to knock Marvin Vettori out, but I just don't see it. I think there would have to be a real special type of fighter to put Marvin Vettori out with like next level power in his hands. But even though it's possible with Bruno Ferreira, I think he's just going to beat Marvin Vettori up for 3 rounds on the feet. So I am picking Bruno the Hulk Ferreira by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Terrence McKinney versus Chris Duncan, and this is a very interesting fight here at lightweight, you know, and looking over the Terrence McKinney side, you know, if you know who Terrence McKinney is, you know that this kid is a one-round and pretty much done fighter. I mean, he is all gas, no brakes, all fireworks in that first round, especially the first 2 minutes. He comes out like a shitstorm out of hell, from hell, just throwing crazy shots, puts a high pressure, high pace on you, and he's very explosive. You know, and if he's not knocking you out immediately, he's taking you down and submitting you. And if he's not submitting you immediately, then he's hitting you with a shot and knocking you out, you know, so Terrence McKinney is a lot out of the gate. You know, in that first round, he's always dangerous. He's always live to win. And, you know, it's a very high likelihood that in that first round, he's going to catch a lot of guys with that shot and finish it. But once you drag Terrence McKinney outside of like the 3-minute mark of the first round, that's where his chances of winning drop drastically, and especially if it goes out of the first round. So he's pretty much a one-and-done fighter at this point. You know, he could evolve, he could develop to become more than that and grow and to be a better fighter in the later rounds. But as of right now, Terrence McKinney is just kind of a coin flip, you know, one and done in that first round. And, you know, with a lot of guys, he's going to be able to catch them and put them away early. But you look over at Chris Duncan, and Chris Duncan has been very, very solid so far. He's only had 1 loss to Manuel Torres, not knocking him there. You know, Manuel Torres is very good. But, you know, we look at what he did to Blachowicz. We look at what he did to, Jordan Vucinic. And then in his last fight, Mateusz Rebecki, who's a tank and just a storm and who comes at you. And he was able to survive that and come back and win. And, you know, and Chris Duncan has just been tough, you know, like he's been hard to hurt, hard to put away. And I think in this fight, you know, it's going to wind up being that Terrence McKinney's going to come out, he's going to put it on him, he's going to be throwing shots, he's going to be looking for that finish. And if Chris Duncan can survive that early onslaught, I think he wins this fight all day. You know, and is it possible that Terrence McKinney comes out and cracks him with a shot and submits him? Sure. Is it possible that he comes out and lands a big kick or a big shot and knocks him out in the first minute and 30 seconds? Sure. But I don't feel confident in taking that risk in this fight because I feel like Chris Duncan is just tough enough to survive a storm, and if he survives that storm, he is going to come back and beat Terrence McKinney. And if it goes out of that first round, the chances of Chris Duncan go up by 98%. So even though I have picked Terrence McKinney in the past to pull off that quick win, I don't think it's going to happen in this fight. I think Chris Duncan's going to be too smart. He's going to expect it. He's going to be able to avoid it or survive it. And then I think he's going to drag Terrence McKinney into the second round, start to put that pressure on him, get Terrence tired, and then I think Chris Duncan is going to wind up wrapping up a submission and submitting Terrence McKinney in the first round because Chris Duncan has very good jiu-jitsu. He's got very good guillotine chokes. We saw what he did to Blachowicz, you know, had a guillotine choke in that fight, another guillotine choke against Jordan Vucinic. And I think he's just going to be able to drag Terrence McKinney into that detrimental second round and wind up getting the submission. So I am going to pick Chris Duncan by second round. Oh, I'm sorry. I accidentally picked KO. I picked Chris Duncan by submission in the second round in this fight. All right, and now we are moving on up to Grant Dawson versus Manuel Torres, and this is a very interesting fight here at lightweight because we look over at the Grant Dawson side, and Grant Dawson at this point is a UFC veteran. He's very well-rounded, very solid on the feet, very good on the ground, a very, very, very well-rounded fighter. And Grant Dawson, he's a handful for a lot of guys. He's just that veteran experience, his ability to adjust in fights, and figure you out, download you, adjust to the striking, adjust to the grappling, and he's just got a lot of high fight IQ. And, we look over on the Manuel Torres side, and Manuel Torres has looked like an absolute problem. Outside of his loss to Ignacio Bahamondes back at the Sphere over a year ago, which you can't knock him for because Ignacio Bahamondes is a very tall, very good fighter. Manuel Torres has been an absolute Mexican sniper, man. The guy just has phenomenal power in his punches. We saw what he did to Frank Camacho, hitting him with the right hook. Nicolas Mata with that devastating elbow, and he just has that kind of one-shot power to put you to sleep. And, this is a very tricky fight because even though Grant Dawson is so well-rounded and he has so much veteran experience, Grant Dawson is not super, super dangerous on the feet. Like he boxes with you. He's able to edge the rounds and outstrike you, but Grant Dawson has been caught and knocked out before. And that is what worries me in this fight. And the reason it worries me so much is that he was caught and knocked out by Bobby Green. And this was just 2 years ago, but Bobby Green has been on the decline, and Bobby Green has never been known for his power. Bobby Green is pretty much purely a defensive fighter. He's a good boxer, a slick boxer, one of the best defensive moving boxers back in the day. But, Bobby Green has not been historically known for his power, and he was able to catch Grant Dawson with a big shot and knock him out, and it was pretty jarring. You're like, wow, Bobby Green just put away one of the toughest kids in the division, and that is not a good sign, because if Bobby Green is catching you and knocking you out on the tail end of him declining, I think someone like Manuel Torres, who is so big and has such phenomenal distance striking with that power, I think Manuel Torres is going to be a problem in that first round. And I think Manuel Torres is going to catch Grant Dawson in the first round with a massive shot and knock him out. And Grant Dawson could survive the striking onslaught. He could survive that pressure, that boxing, and then pull out that veteran experience, drag Manuel into those later rounds and start to somewhat edge the rounds in striking. But I just don't see it. I think Manuel Torres is too sharp, too slick, too powerful. And I think Manuel Torres is going to wind up cracking him with a big shot and catching him like Bobby Green did. So I am going to go ahead and side with Manuel Torres to get the knockout in this fight and, kind of go ahead and ascend up the ladder, to another bigger fight for him. But, Grant Dawson is a veteran. He's always got the potential to pull out a very well-rounded performance and beat you and drag a younger, more inexperienced fighter into those deeper waters. But I think Manuel Torres, outside of that Ignacio Bahamondes loss, I think he's the real deal. He's got power, he's got length, he's got speed, and I think he can catch Grant Dawson. So I am going to go Manuel Torres by KO in this one. All right, and now we are moving up to Firas Ziam versus Nazim Sadykhov, and this is going to be one of the most interesting, close fights of the night, because you look over at Firas Ziam, and he's one of the most talented strikers we have seen come out of France. I mean, he is absolutely massive. He's 6'1" with a 75-inch reach, very tall, very long frame, and Firas Ziam has just gotten better and better and better, and he is on a massive win streak right now, picking up great wins against Jai Herbert, Claudio Puelles, Matt Favola with that absolutely devastating knee that sent him into another dimension. I mean, one of the most vicious knee knockouts we've ever seen in the UFC. And then the most recent win against Mike Davis. Firas Ziam is very talented, very long, a great range striker, keeps people at the end of his punches very well. And his length and his height is just it's been very hard to deal with for a lot of guys. And then we look over at Nazim Sadykhov, and he's been an absolute killer. I mean, stopping Ismail Bonfim, which is a huge feather in the cap, and then in his last fight, getting in that war with Nicolas Mota and catching him with that right hook. I mean, that was such a crazy back and forth fight, and he wound up surviving the storm and knocking Nicolas Mota out, and in this fight, it's very interesting because Firas Ziam, with that range and that length and that ability to keep that lengthy striking so solid, I think it's, very difficult for guys to get in on him in most fights, but in this fight, Nazim Sadykhov, he's got great striking, he's got very good underrated jiu-jitsu, he's got good grappling, and he's very tough, very sharp on the feet. And even though there is a world where I could see Ziam just keeping it on the outside, picking him apart with jabs and 1-2s, and keeping it long, and just using that beautiful boxing, I think there is a world where Nazim can get in on the inside, get past that striking, and start to land some power shots on Ziam. And if he can get past that range and not be stuck on the outside, I think he can get inside, get past those shots, land some big shots of his own, and I think Nazim, with that underrated jiu-jitsu, can get underneath that lengthy, long frame of Ziam and take him down, and I think he can possibly submit him here. And it is a very close fight. I went back and forth on it because if Nazim gets stuck on the outside, he's going to get picked apart all night. And Faraz is just going to use that reach, that length, those 1s, those 2s, and pick him apart to a decision. And I really, really wanted to pick Faraz in this fight. But I think Nazim is just slick enough, just powerful enough, and he's got that jiu-jitsu in his back pocket to where he can get in on that long, lengthy range, get a hold of Ziam, take him down, and possibly submit him. So I am going to go ahead and very slightly side with Nazim Sadykhov to get in on Faraz, get past the lengthy range striking, and get him down to the ground, get on top of him, and submit him. And even though it's a very close fight, it could go to Faraz, it could be a split decision, he could use that beautiful boxing and all that range and just pick him apart. I'm going to take the chance on Nazim to get that takedown, get that submission, and move on to a third fight win streak here. He did have the decision majority, I think it was a draw with Vyacheslav Borshev, but I think he can pull this off in a very, very close competitive fight. So I'm going to go Nazim Sadykhov by submission in this one. All right, and now we are moving on up to Mansour Abdul Malik versus Antonio Trocoli. And, in this fight, this is a pretty cut and dry fight for me. Not in need in too much of a breakdown here, but, Antonio Trocoli is just not that good at all. You look at his fights so far, he's been knocked out by Sharabullet Magomedov, knocked out by, or submitted by Tresean Gore, which is, not looking good at all. And, he's just been very underwhelming in his performances. He's been getting caught a lot, and he's 35 years old. He's pretty much at his ceiling, and, he's really not going to evolve past where he's at, and this is kind of a spot where he's going to start to eat more losses. He's going to start to get finished quite a bit more often, and then he's going to wind up just getting cut and released. And I don't think he's cut out for the UFC. I don't think he's built for the top level game here. And we look over at Mansour Abdul Malik, and he's looked very solid, knocking out Nicholas Klein, knocking out Dusko Todorovic, with a huge flurry of shots, and he's got very slick striking. He's only 28 years old, so he's pretty much hitting his prime right now, 6'2", 79-inch reach, and he's got the power. He's got the upside. He's got the speed. He's got the striking. He's got the youth. And Antonio Trocoli at this point is just pretty much a punching bag. At 35, with these losses and that bad chin, I think Malik is just going to come forward, crack Antonio with a huge shot, and I think he's going to wind up knocking him out, and it's going to be pretty cut and dry and pretty easy for him. So I am going to go ahead and pick Mansour Abdul Malik to pick up the win and go ahead and continue, a nice solid knockout streak here. So Mansour Abdul Malik by first round KO is the pick in this one. All right, and now we are moving on up to Macy Barber versus Karine Silva, and a very interesting fight here at women's flyweight. When we look over at the Macy Barber side, Macy Barber has looked, very, very solid over the last few years. She's got a lot of high output. She's gotten much better back from where she was about 4 or 5 years ago, where she was struggling and losing fights, and she's really been putting it together. Her striking's looked good, her combinations, her pressure, her forward flurries, and she puts a pressure on girls. She's very intense. She comes forward with a lot. She throws a lot at you, and she really doesn't stop. But the one thing with Macy Barber is, she's been on the shelf now for a year, almost 2 years. It feels like she fought a lot sooner than that, but, it's actually been pushing 2 years now, which is crazy. And right when she was kind of hitting a stride, then she takes this long extended time off. She was supposed to come back and fight Erin Blanchfield back months ago in the Apex, and she wound up pulling out of the fight at the very last second in the locker room, and it was really strange. They were saying that she got sick at the last second, and then there were rumors that she had a panic attack and didn't want to walk out, which doesn't look good at all. So Maycee Barber, to go from having that happen, and then you look at her time sitting off, I don't think that's really good for her. And then you look at, the women that she's beat, and these women are not that good. Like if you really look at her level of competition, Jessica Eye has always been very bottom of the barrel, very low level. You look at Andrea Lee, not good at all. A very low level striker on the feet who has pretty much been on like a 4 or 5 fight losing streak, and I think they already cut Andrea Lee. Andrea Lee was never that good of a striker and very low level. Then you look at Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas is pretty solid. She was able to, overwhelm Amanda in that fight, get her down, TKO her on the ground, and that was pretty impressive. But then you look at her recent fight with Caitlin Saramania, and she's even worse. Easily the worst opponent Maycee Barber has fought. So she's been fighting very low-level girls, and I think that's why her performances have looked so good. It's not so much that she's so super talented, it's more that she's just fought lower level can girls. And I think once she starts to fight higher level competition, then we're really going to see resistance, and Maycee Barber start to have, problems with higher level girls with really good striking, that are actually good on the feet, that have really good jiu-jitsu. And I look over at Karine Silva, and Karine Silva has looked pretty damn solid since she's been in the UFC. She's got great, excellent high-level black belt jiu-jitsu, submitting Ketlin Souza, popping her knee with a nasty knee bar, then getting her in the guillotine choke, Marina Moroz, catching her by the neck, So her jiu-jitsu has looked very solid, and she's looked very solid on the feet. Very good boxing, sharp, crisp, sharp, hard punches. And we look over at her loss to Viviane Araújo, and that was a pretty competitive fight, but Viviane was able to pull it off. And I won't knock her too much in that fight, because she was able to bounce back in the fight with Dione Barboza. And even though that was a controversial fight, and a lot of people thought she wound up losing that fight, and it was kind of a questionable call from the judges, she did pick up the win, and she does have solid striking, and she does have very good jiu-jitsu. And I'm looking at it and going, Maycee's been on the shelf for so long. She had the weird issue with the Erin Blanchfield fight back a few months ago. And even though she's, very pressure forward heavy, and she puts a lot out there, I think there is a world where Karine Silva can actually pick the better shots, land the harder shots, and I think she can beat Maycee Barber in this fight. Because I think Karine Silva is going to be the best girl outside of Amanda Ribas that Maycee Barber has fought, and I think she's going to pose some challenges and a real threat to her. So even though it's a very tough fight, and I went back and forth on it, and I could see Maycee Barber coming out, possibly overwhelming her with shots, overwhelming her with a flurry, just out-edging her in the strikes, and it looking very good to the judges, I'm going to go ahead and say that Karine Silva can land the bigger, harder shots, control her in the grappling, even possibly get Maycee Barber down, and I am going to pick Karine Silva by decision in this fight. I'm going to give her a shot with Maycee Barber's time off, and then the strange thing that was going on with her a few months ago. But I'm going to say Karine Silva can pick up this win, probably most likely a 29-28, and edge it out. It could be a split decision. It could be very close. But I'm going to go ahead and give Karine Silva a chance in this fight to upset Maycee Barber and be a real solid true test for her. So Karine Silva by decision is going to be the official pick. All right, and now we are moving on up to Brandon Moreno versus Tatsuro Taira, and man, this is such an incredible fight at flyweight, one of the toughest, best fights of the night, and I went back and forth on this fight so much, and I am still not super confident in this pick, but you look over at Brandon Moreno, and Brandon Moreno, he is an absolute veteran, pretty much a legend at this point, one of the greatest fighters the UFC has ever seen, a former champion, one of the most well-rounded, solid strikers, great grappling, great jiu-jitsu, such a well-rounded threat, and he has had so many incredible veteran performances, so many incredible title fights, and, title wins, title defenses, and Brandon Moreno has just been an absolute assassin, it is in his name, the assassin baby, he's such a problem for so many guys, and then, he took some time off, after the Brandon Royval loss, which I thought he won that fight. That was a very bad call. It was a very misleading in the strike charts because the strike chart said that Brandon Royval was outstriking Brandon Moreno in that fight, and it absolutely wasn't true. Brandon Royval was putting out a lot of input, a lot of output, but he was missing most of his punches, and then the other half of his punches were getting blocked. Moreno was blocking quite a solid amount of Brandon Royval's shots, and a lot of those shots were just missing and just barely hitting the glove. So Brandon Royval was really not landing that many shots in that fight, but because his output was so consistent, it just looked better to the judges, and the judges gave him the win. But Brandon Moreno was the one that was landing the significant strikes in that fight. He was the one landing the big, solid connecting shots, and Brandon Royval's shots were either just missing or hitting the glove. So he should have won that fight, but, he came back, after a good bit of time off and had that incredible performance against Amir Albazi, and then he had the fantastic performance against Steve Erceg. So, Brandon Moreno is still in his prime. He's still looking phenomenal. And then you look over at Tatsuro Taira, and he has absolutely so much potential. This kid is only 25 years old. He's got incredible striking, nasty power in his hands, fantastic jiu-jitsu, fantastic grappling, and this kid is just such a well-rounded package problem, and his striking, there's just been so many moments of fights where he's cracking guys with like ones and twos, and just the crispness, the accuracy, his ability to put guys down, his ability to control guys, get on their back. We saw what he did to Alex Perez, get on his back, put him in a body triangle, lean back and blow his knee out. It's a very unfortunate way to win a fight and a very unfortunate injury, but it's effective. If you can wrap a dude up, make him pull his weight on a joint and take that joint out, that's part of the game, unfortunately. But Tatsuro Taira is just, he's looked so crisp, so incredible with his striking, phenomenal ground control, phenomenal jiu-jitsu. And I went back and forth in this because Brandon Moreno has so much championship level experience, and he's such a veteran, and he's been in so many 5-round fights. He's not going to get tired. He has endless cardio, so that's not going to be a problem. But I look over at it and go, Tatsuro Taira has so much potential to really, really edge these rounds with sharper striking, more significant striking. He is the slightly harder hitter. And we've seen Brandon Moreno get hit in fights and take damage and get cut up and busted up. And I think Tatsuro Taira has that ability to land very significant, very sharp 1-2s, 1-2-3 combinations and bust you up. And then he can get in on you, wrap you up, get to your back, control you, hold you, get you to the ground, and Brandon Moreno's very good with his grappling. He's very scrambly. He's able to get out of positions. But even though I'm going back and forth on it, and it's such a razor close fight, this is going to be the closest fight of the night. I'm going back and forth on it, and I want to pick Brandon Moreno so bad. But something is telling me that Tatsuro Taira is going to wind up pulling this off by a hair. I think it's going to be like a 29-28 split decision where Brandon's putting a lot of output, a lot of movement. He's landing some shots on Tatsuro, but Tatsuro winds up cracking him with bigger counter shots, beating him just barely in these scrambles and control. And I think he's going to do just enough to pull this decision off, and it could go to Brandon Moreno. It could be a razor close split decision, and Brandon could wind up taking over with his UFC veteran experience and all that championship experience. And if this was a 5-round fight, I would be picking Brandon Moreno all day because those championship rounds are where he's going to shine. But I think Tatsuro Taira can actually pull off 3 rounds against Brandon Moreno with, great cardio, sharper striking, more impactful, harder shots. And I think he can match Brandon Moreno in the scrambling and the grappling. So I am going to, by a micro hair, pick Tatsuro Taira to pick up a 29-28, probably split decision against Brandon Moreno, because when he loses, it tends to be a split decision in a very close fight. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Tatsuro Taira in this fight to get the huge win for his young career and continue moving up the ranks and looking very impressive down the road. So Tatsuro Taira by decision is the official pick. All right, and we are moving on up to Jan Blachowicz versus Bogdan Guskov, and this is a very fun fight at light heavyweight here. And you look over at the Jan Blachowicz side, and Jan Blachowicz is an absolute veteran, one of the most solid veterans the UFC has ever had, and he's got that Polish power. He is a Polish problem, but Jan Blachowicz, for all the great, impressive wins that he's had over his career, the war that he had with Magomed Ankalaev a few years ago for the belt, and knocking out Luke Rockhold, and giving Alex Pereira a real test at light heavyweight and almost beating him in that fight. Jan Blachowicz is just a veteran. He's got good, sharp boxing. He's got good hands, good solid power, and he's just a tank on the feet. He's really a tank of a fighter. But the problem with Jan Blachowicz is that, he is 42 years old now. He is up there in age, and he, in his most recent fights, is really starting to slow down. And that's the thing with Jan Blachowicz, is that he's never been a super fast striker. He's never been super athletic. He's been pretty stiff on the feet. He moves pretty decently. His power and his hands are able to keep guys back, and he's able to, really land, good solid shots in the pocket and really kind of stun guys. But Jan Blachowicz has never been a super fast, super athletic fighter. Like he moves well on the feet, but, sometimes he's kind of stiff, he's kind of upright a little bit, and then he winds up, eating shots. And, even though Jan Blachowicz is, such a well-rounded veteran in that aspect, I look over at a fighter like Bogdan Guskov, who's up and coming. He's picking up a lot of solid wins. He's got really sharp striking. He's got speed. He's got zip. He's got pop in his punches, and he moves well. He kind of has this hunched over style where he's able to hunch you and move and just kind of outstrike you and be a little more athletic, and we saw what he's done in his last few fights to Ryan Spann, knocking Ryan Spann out, Billy Elikana submitting him, and then his most recent win with Nikita Krylov, just catching him with a shot and knocking him out on the ground. So Bogdan Guskov, he's only 33, stepping into a prime. He's fast, he's athletic, he hits hard, and Jan Blachowicz, like I said, is a little stiff on the feet. He's not super flexible, doesn't have a lot of dynamic movement, doesn't move his head very well. And even though Jan, has so much veteran experience and he's got great hands, I think Bogdan Guskov is going to be a little too explosive for him. He's going to hit harder, and he's going to be a little faster to the punch. And I think Bogdan is going to wind up beating Jan Blachowicz by decision. I don't think he's knocking Jan out. Nobody finishes Jan. Jan's got a fantastic chin, one of the best chins of all time, and he's very hard to hurt. It's very rare you ever see Jan Blachowicz get hurt in a fight. But Jan is just, if this fight was happening maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I'd probably be picking Jan. Even though he's not super fast and athletic on the feet, those hands, that shot selection, that power, I could see Jan picking up this win if he was a few years younger. But at 42, slowing down on the feet, coming off 2 losses, the loss to Alex Pereira by split decision, and then the loss to Carlos Ulberg, who's a very fast, dynamic, sharp, explosive striker, I think Jan is going to wind up struggling in this fight, and I think he's going to be behind in the striking. So I am going to go ahead and pick Bogdan Guskov by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to Henry Cejudo versus Payton Talbott. And this is such a fantastic fight here, one of the most interesting fights of the night. And we are looking over at the Henry Cejudo side, and Henry Cejudo is, a former champion, a small mini legend within the UFC, and Henry Cejudo has given us so many incredible performances, over the years, and now Henry Cejudo is hitting, he's hitting that age. He's 38. He's starting to hit that decline, and this is pretty much it. This is going to be a wrap on Henry Cejudo's career, because this is going to be his retirement fight. And even though he's given us, so many incredible fights in the past, and wound up beating Demetrius Johnson, which was a huge feather in the cap, and then having all these other incredible wins, we look at his last 3 fights, and we look at the loss to Aljamain Sterling. We look at the loss to Merab Dvalishvili, where Merab was able to pick him up and ragdoll him and take him down. And then we look at the loss to Yadong Song, and in that fight, it was really unfortunate because it was competitive up until Henry got poked in the eyes, and we never want to see an eye poke. We've been plagued with eye pokes recently, like we saw in the Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane fight, and some other fights recently. But, Henry Cejudo was looking okay, pretty decent in that fight until he got poked in the eye, and then he just couldn't see, and he wound up losing that fight. They wound up stopping it because of the eye poke, and it's just been really unfortunate and tough for Henry, because he's 38 years old. He's on his way out the door in his retirement fight, but we look over at the Payton Talbott side, and Payton Talbott has looked very, very impressive so far. He did have the loss to Ronnie Barcelos, but, that was a case of a very green, very, very sharp striker with no wrestling coming up against a veteran who has excellent wrestling and excellent jiu-jitsu. And in that fight, Payton Talbott's inexperience and his lack of grappling defense showed. And Ronnie Barcelos was able to just put the pressure on him, get a hold of him, and take him down and hold him down, So Payton Talbott did have a very hard test in that fight, but outside of that, his striking has looked fantastic. And you look at the phenomenal wins he's had against Cameron Simon, Giannis Gamora, and then in his last fight, Felipe Lima, looking very sharp, very, very powerful and fast on the feet. And I look at this fight and go, Henry Cejudo is a mini legend, a former champion, an Olympic champion, and he's given us so many great performances over the years. And if this fight was happening 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'd be picking Henry Cejudo because, he was still in his prime at that point, still so well-rounded, such an intelligent fighter on the feet with his grappling, his ability to get in on guys, get a hold of them, take them down, control them, and then his high-level striking on the feet. But Henry is pretty much out the door, and I just don't think he's mentally there, I don't think he doesn't obviously, he's going out the door to retire, so he's not going to have that hunger, that championship mentality, that desire to really take a win. And I think it's just, let me take one more fight and then ride off into the sunset. And, if this fight was a few years ago, I would be giving Henry a much higher chance in this fight, but I just can't do it because I don't think Henry's going to be able to take Payton down. I don't think he's going to be able to get past the sharp range striking from Payton. I don't think he's going to be able to deal with that power as well. And I think Henry is just going to kind of get stuck on the feet with Payton, and I think Payton is going to wind up lighting Henry up in this fight, and I would love to see a good competitive one last big showing from Henry and it make it really close and maybe go out on a win. But I think to Payton Talbott, yes, he took the loss to Ronnie Barcelos, but I think he's back on track, and I don't think Henry is going to have that kind of success with the takedowns. Maybe 5 years ago, he would have that success with the takedowns and the wrestling and the grappling, but I don't see it now. I don't think the hunger's there. I don't think the desire's there, and I think Payton Talbott is going to put on a show in this fight, and I think he's going to crack Henry with big shots. I think he's going to make him pay, and I think we're going to see Henry Cejudo get behind in this fight in the striking, eat a lot of shots, take some damage, and I think Payton Talbott's going to wind up winning this fight 30-27, and, Henry's a legend, a former champion, Olympic champion, he's a veteran, but, this is the final ride. This is time to go out into the sunset and say, thanks, guys, thanks for the memories, but I'm going to go ahead and say Payton Talbott is just the faster, sharper, more imposing striker on the feet, and I think he beats Henry Cejudo in this fight. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Payton Talbott by decision in this one. All right, and we are moving on up to the co-main event of the evening, and I absolutely cannot wait to talk about this. And we are looking at Alexandre Pantoja versus Joshua Van, and this is such an interesting fight, and I look over at the Joshua Van side, and as you have known, if you've watched my predictions, if you've been following me for the last year or two, you know that I am a massive Joshua Van fan, and I just, from the minute this kid has stepped into the company, I have been so absolutely blown away from him. Literally, from his first fight in the UFC, I was like, look at this kid's boxing. It's so crisp. It's so flowing. It's so fluid. His combinations are incredible. Even his first fight, his striking looked that good, and I immediately knew right then, I'm like, this kid's going to be a problem. He's a future problem. That boxing is just so phenomenal, and at the time, he's 24 now, he would have been 22 then. At 22 years old to have such phenomenal striking like that, and then you look what he's done in the last year and a half, the guys that he's beat, the way that he's beat them, and then you look and see what he did to Brandon Royval, an absolute, striking veteran. He took it to Brandon Royval. He stood in the pocket with him. He hurt Royval. Royval cracked him with shots, and he just brought that pit bull out, and he outlasted Royval. He took him into deep waters. He dropped him with big shots. He threw flurries of shots. Joshua Van looked absolutely incredible in that fight. And, he just has, at 24 years old, he has some of the best pure boxing in the UFC. He's in the top 5 strikers right now. Literally, in terms of pure boxing, he is a top 5 striker. He really is, and It's just the fluidity, the combinations, his cardio, the way he comes forward, the way he moves, man. Everything about this kid is so good on a technical level. And then you look over at Alexandre Pantoja, and they call him the cannibal, and he is the cannibal for a reason, because he is such a UFC veteran. He's been around so long, and he has some of the most high-level grappling we've ever seen. And that is Pantoja's bread and butter, is his grappling. And strikers go up against him thinking they're going to have success and be able to keep it on the feet and stop the takedown, and then they quickly realize, man, this grappling is different. It's on another level, and Pantoja's so good at luring you into a striking fight for a little bit, and right when you think, okay, I'm going to be able to, impose my game plan on this guy, then he shoots in on you. And we've seen what he's done in all these fights so far to Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, Steve Erceg, taking him down multiple times in that fight, getting underneath the striking, Kai Asakura, Kai Kara France. I mean, that grappling is just next level, and it's so good. And that is his key to win in this fight, because Joshua Van is not going to grapple. Joshua Van doesn't grapple. He has no interest in that. Joshua Van wants to stand on the feet with you, go toe-to-toe, and just bang it out with you. And if you do that with Joshua Van, even at 24 years old, you're going to lose. You stand on the feet with this kid, he is going to outstrike you at this age already. And so this is going to be a pure striker versus a pure grappler. And even though I love Joshua Van so much, and I see the world in this kid, so much potential at the young age of 24, so much more room to grow, so much more room to get those already amazing hands even better, this is a tough fight for him to take right now at this stage of his career. At 24, and you've never fought a grappler of this caliber, that is a huge mountain to climb. And, in a world where if Joshua Van can stop these takedowns, if Joshua Van can get up from these takedowns, he is 100% going to win this fight, and he could. He could turn the tide if he starts to get up and he starts to strike with Pantoja, because the one thing with Pantoja is his striking is not that good. It's never been that good. His striking is a little wild. It's a little sloppy. It's a little 1-2 here and there. But Alexandre Pantoja has never been known for his fluid combination striking. He's never been super accurate. He's never really hit that hard, and Pantoja does get caught on the feet. So if this fight takes place on the feet, Joshua Van is going to outstrike him for at least 3 to 4 rounds of this fight and pull off the biggest upset and one of the biggest win of his career at the young age of 24. But I look at it and go, Joshua Van is going to come forward. He's going to be throwing that pressure. He's going to be throwing that boxing. And I think once he starts to let go with those shots, Alexandre Pantoja, that veteran experience, that timing, that ability to know when to properly shoot, I think Alexandre Pantoja is just going to start to get under those combinations and shoot takedowns, and I think he's going to be able to hold Joshua Van down. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope Joshua Van can get up and light him up and win this fight. I'm rooting for Van all day. I've got the Van flag up. But my MMA brain is telling me that this is too young, too soon, too much, too soon. And Joshua Van might lose this fight. He might grow. He might get better. He might improve on the wrestling and the takedown defense, and then he rematches Alexandre Pantoja a few months from now, next year, and then he's able to get the win. Maybe in a few years he builds more experience, gets back to a title, and then he wins. He has so much time to get to multiple title shots. But I think right now, at 24, with never fighting a grappler of this caliber, I think it's going to be a problem. And I want to be wrong, but I'm going to have to side with Alexandre Pantoja in this fight to shoot the takedowns, get underneath the combination striking of Joshua Van, get him to the mat, control him on the mat, and I think at a point he's going to wind up wrapping Joshua Van up in a submission, and that's going to be that. And Joshua Van will take this loss with grace. He will learn from this loss, and he will grow from this loss, and he will be back bigger and better than ever. But I think this is just a little too much, a little too soon for such a young striker. And I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to stick with Alexandre Pantoja in this fight to beat him with the grappling, get the takedowns, and submit him. And if not, he picks up a 48-47, 49-46 decision over Joshua Van. Alrighty, and we are moving on up to the main event of the evening, and we are looking at Merab Dvalishvili versus Petr Yan 2 in a very interesting fight here at bantamweight, and we look over at the Merab Dvalishvili side, and Merab Dvalishvili has easily been the most impressive Terminator tank grappler cardio machine that we have ever seen. I mean, Merab just puts a pace on you, a pressure on you, an ability to break you like we have never seen, and his cardio is endless. This man is shooting, in the first Petr Yan fight, he had like 49 takedown attempts, and he got 11 of those takedowns. And even though he missed a lot of those attempts, the fact that he didn't get tired, and then Petr Yan didn't come back and outstrike him and start beating him in that fight and knocking him out was incredible. To not get so many takedowns and still not get tired just shows how high level his cardio is. And Merab is just an absolute machine. He's endless with that grappling, that pressure, able to get in on a single leg, trip you down, drag you down. His reversals, his ability to get you up against the cage and just hold you, outwork you, get you down against the cage, shooting clean double legs out in the center, and Merab is just so incredibly hard to deal with. And in the first fight, Petr Yan just couldn't, he had no answer to it. He was able to stuff some of the takedowns, he was able to get out of some of the single legs, but eventually that started to wear on Petr Yan. Merab was able to start to successfully get in under the hips, lock the hands, take him down, hold him down, and it was a lot for Petr Yan. And you look over at the Petr Yan side, and he is one of the best boxers in the UFC, some of the best pure striking we have ever seen. Crisp, beautiful hands, great boxing, great fight IQ. And one thing that Petr Yan is so good at is that he is able to read you, he's able to download you, and he's able to adjust. And with so many guys in the past, we've seen Petr Yan, maybe kind of sit back in a first round, maybe kind of, lose a first round. But then once he gets into that second round, he starts to download your timing, your pattern, and then he starts to adjust. And then he starts to take that fight over, and now you're like, oh God, like now you're overwhelmed, you're getting backed up, you're getting outstruck. He's beating you to the punch everywhere, and Petr Yan is so tactical in the way that he breaks guys down, and the way that he downloads you and figures you out. And against so many guys, he's going to be a problem. And in any other world, he would probably already be a champion like he should have been, which he was a champion in the past. But, we saw what happened in the Aljo fight, the down knee, him losing the belt to Aljo like that, which was very, very unfortunate. So, we look at Petr Yan, and he is such a phenomenal striker, and he's looked fantastic on the feet against a lot of guys. But when you look over at the Merab Dvalishvili side, I mean, that cardio, that wrestling, that pressure, it's just different, and he's not going to stop. He's never going to stop. And even if you stop the takedowns, you're spending so many of the rounds backing up, and getting grabbed and getting held, and I just think it's going to be too much for Petr Yan even in this rematch, and Petr Yan's takedown defense is pretty good. If he can stop these takedowns early for the first few rounds and really land some shots on Merab, he could make this close. But I just can't see Petr Yan stopping enough of these takedowns to win this fight. And I can't see him landing enough clean shots on Merab to really start to steal rounds. He might be able to take a round, maybe two, but Merab's endless cardio, his endless pressure, his endless ability to get a hold of you, single leg you, grab you around the waist, drag you down, hold you, control you, it's just so much, and if it was anybody else, I'd probably be picking Petr Yan. But in this fight, I am going to have to go ahead and stick with Merab, the machine, the cardio Terminator, the Georgian grappler to get it done once again. And I think he's going to wind up beating Petr Yan probably 49-46 in this fight, maybe a 48-47. So I am picking Merab Dvalishvili by decision in this one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed my predictions in this video, please give me a like, please give me a subscribe, and I will see you in my predictions for UFC 324. Take care.